The phone rang just after sunrise. I let it buzz once-twice before I picked up. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in 3 days. Not since the funeral. Not since the final shovel of dirt fell onto Roberto's grave. "Ma'am?" Fermin's voice cracked, and I could hear wind in the background, maybe horses shifting. "I think your husband. Please come, before anyone else does." That was all he said. I didn't change clothes. I didn't brush my hair. I grabbed the spare keys slid on the old boots by the back door and drove out to the far end of the property. The stables out past the cattle fencing hadn't been touched in years. Roberto always said it was storage. Old junk, he'd told me. Nothing worth digging through. Fermin was already waiting by the gate. His face had aged since the burial, like he'd carried 3 days of silence that didn't belong to him. He didn't speak, just held out a single key, brass worn smooth, then gestured to the lock. The door groaned open on its hinges. It smelled like damp hay and something else, rust and time. I stepped inside slowly, and there in the corner of the stall was a half-dug hole. A shovel still leaned against the wall. An old iron chest sat just beside it, its lid open. Inside, brittle papers, a cracked leather pouch, and a photograph. Edges curled, burned along the bottom. I picked it up with both hands. Roberto, younger, leaner, in a denim shirt I'd never seen. His arm was around a woman, light hair, sharp chin. She was holding a toddler, maybe 3, and all 3 of them were smiling. On the back of the photo, in Roberto's handwriting, the ink nearly gone, August 14th, 1982. Marcella, Enrique. I didn't sit down. I just stood there while something inside me tilted out of place. The air around me didn't move, but the room felt smaller. I folded the photo once and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I turned and walked out of the stall with the key still clutched in my hand. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't turn on the radio or open the window. I drove with the photo pressed between my fingers, like it might vanish if I let it go. I parked too close to the fence and left the engine running longer than I meant to. When I stepped inside, everything looked the same. The boots by the door, the book Roberto had been reading still on the armrest. But nothing felt familiar. I sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the photograph again. The handwriting was definitely his. I traced the names Marcella, Enrique. Neither had ever passed through Roberto's lips in the years I'd known him. Not once. We met in 1985 at the Taos County Fair. He bought my quilted aprons. I offered him coffee. We married the following spring and moved to this ranch before the summer rains. We chose not to have children, or at least I thought we chose. Maybe the decision had already been made without me. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I opened the safe in the study. Old deed records, insurance policies, Roberto's military discharge papers. Everything I'd seen before. But behind the final folder, tucked flat under a faded envelope marked "Personal," I found it. A will. Not the one we'd signed together 10 years ago. This one was dated 2 months before his death. His signature was sharp, clear. The contents were not. To Maribel Knox, 50% of real property, including all jointly held livestock accounts and machinery. To Enrique Dalton, 50% of real property, specifically the land and water rights of Knox Ranch northern parcel. I read it twice then, again slower. Enrique Dalton, not a cousin, not a nephew. A name that didn't belong to anyone I'd ever heard Roberto mention. A son. Roberto had a son. He left him half of our home. I closed the safe gently, like it might echo if I slammed it. Then I pulled the curtains open and watched the pasture, trying to picture what came next and what face might appear through the dust. I didn't go back to the stables the next morning. I couldn't. Instead, I found Fermin by the tool shed, sorting through feed buckets as if nothing in the world had shifted. When I said Enrique's name, he stopped moving. His shoulders sank, and he wiped his hands on his jeans before meeting my eyes. "I hoped you'd never have to know," he said quietly. "But yes, years ago he told me about a woman in Arizona. Said he made mistakes. Said there was a boy he lost touch with. A boy. A child hidden between decades, folded away like a letter never meant to be read. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he shook his head. "It wasn't my place, and he always said he'd handle it. But Roberto never handled anything alone. Not the drought years, not the broken fences, not his recovery from surgery. Except this. After Fermín left, I sat with his words until they pushed me toward the computer in Roberto's old office. I typed the name from the will, Enrique Dalton, and waited. The first result was a school website in Las Cruces. 6th grade science teacher. A small photo in the corner showed a man with dark hair, square jaw, steady eyes. Roberto's eyes. I drove south that same afternoon, the photo from the stall, tucked in my jacket. Las Cruces was warm and flat, the kind of place where the air always seems to be drifting somewhere else. I parked across from a modest schoolyard and watched children spill out into the sun. And then he appeared. He walked with the same long, sure stride Roberto had. Carried his coffee in the same careful way, fingertips curled around the lid. Serious face, but gentle. He bent down to tie a student's shoe. Lifted a fallen lunchbox, laughed with a softness that caught me off guard. I knew, not because of the photograph, not because of the will, but because something in him felt familiar in a place I didn't want familiarity. I stayed until he drove off, then turned back toward the highway, carrying the weight of a truth I couldn't return. The envelope came 2 days after my trip to Las Cruces. Thick paper, embossed letterhead. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it would say. Still, when I sat at the table and unfolded the letter, my hands shook anyway. The will was valid, filed properly, legally binding. Enrique Dalton was now co-owner of Knox Ranch. I read the sentence twice, maybe 3 times. I set the letter down and stared at it like it might vanish if I blinked, but it stayed. It would stay, just like him. By evening, the news had already started to travel. Fermín must have told one of the hands, and word spread the way it always does on land like this, quiet at first, then everywhere. No one said anything to me directly, but I felt it in their eyes. The unspoken question lingered in the air. Who was he to Roberto, and what would he be to us? 3 mornings later, Enrique arrived. He didn't drive up in a lawyer's car or with papers in hand. Just a quiet, dusty sedan and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Fermín met him at the gate. I stood on the porch and watched him walk across the gravel. He paused, tipped his head to me. Not quite a nod, not quite a bow. "Thank you for letting me come," he said. His voice was calm with the same low timbre I remembered from Roberto in the early years. I gestured for him to sit outside under the cottonwood. We didn't go inside. Not yet. He sat down slowly, his eyes scanning the land like it meant something already. "I don't want anything you didn't want me to have," he said. I need to know." "Did he ever mention me?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Nothing felt honest enough. Or safe enough. "He didn't," I finally said. "Not once." He looked away, jaw tight. I saw the hurt land, then get buried just as quickly. That evening, I walked through the house without turning on any lights. I didn't want clarity. I wanted the shadows, the only things that still felt familiar. I ended up in the bedroom, the place that carried the most pieces of our life, though suddenly, I wasn't sure how many belonged to us at all. I opened Roberto's dresser, not looking for anything in particular. I ran my fingers along the edge of the top drawer, the wood worn smooth from years of use. When I tugged it forward, the back panel shifted slightly. I'd never noticed the gap before. I reached behind it and my hand brushed against something thin. A photograph, older than the first. Its colors faded into sepia tones, edges soft like fabric. The woman from the burned photo. Marcella stood in a simple dress belly, rounded beneath her hands. And Roberto was beside her, young and open-faced, smiling, the way he hadn't in years. They looked like a family. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Roberto's handwriting, her name will be Ava if it's a girl, Enrique if it's a boy. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the names until the letters blurred. He'd planned a life long before mine began next to him. A life he never buried, even if he'd let the rest of the world believe he had. I needed more than photographs and half-dug holes. I needed to know what kind of story I had stepped into, without realizing there was a first chapter missing. The next morning, I called a private investigator I'd used once years ago during a dispute over cattle theft. He remembered my voice instantly. I didn't explain everything, just gave him a name. Marcella Baird, I said. Arizona sometime around the early 80s. I need to know what happened to her, and when Roberto left. He didn't ask why. He just said he'd begin right away. When I hung up, the house felt quieter than before, as if something had been pulled loose. I walked to the window, watching dust lift across the pasture, and tried to imagine where the truth would lead me next. Enrique stayed longer than I expected. He kept to himself, spent hours walking the property with a notepad, stopping by the fencing, checking water pumps. He wasn't disruptive, but he wasn't invisible either. The ranch hands treated him with caution, like a new foreman who hadn't yet proven his weight. I kept busy. That's what Roberto would have said. Keep your hands moving, the heart will catch up. So I did. I moved through chores like a woman still needed, but in the quiet hours between, something restless worked its way through me. The investigator hadn't called back yet, and I couldn't sit still waiting. So I drove to the county clerk's office in Taos just to get copies of old property files for my own record. I'd looked at them before, years ago, when we first set up, but I wanted to see them with new eyes. I wanted to see what Roberto had truly left behind. What I found surprised me. The ranch itself. The land was under both our names, though his was listed first. That I knew. But the operational licenses, the federal contracts for hay subsidies, the loan for the irrigation systems, the title for the tractors. All in my name, every one of them. Some because I'd co-signed. Some because Roberto had been recovering from surgery and asked me to just handle it. I had. And it meant that while Enrique had half the land by law, everything that made it function, everything that made it live, belonged to me. I drove home in silence and pulled the old banking folders from the cabinet. By dusk, I had already filled out the forms to begin separating the accounts. No anger guided me, just clarity. I needed to know that I could keep what I had built with my own hands. I didn't tell Enrique. Not yet. Not until I understood what kind of man he planned to be. That night, I stood outside the equipment shed, watching the last of the light fade behind the barn. Somewhere out in the pasture, Enrique's flashlight blinked. Once then, disappeared into the dark. The investigator called just after noon. His voice was steady, practiced, but there was a hesitation underneath it. I found her, he said. Marcella Baird. She's alive, but not for long. Hospice care outside Flagstaff. I didn't pack much, just a sweater, my wallet, and the photograph I'd found behind the drawer panel. The drive was long and quiet, the kind of quiet that nudges old memories to the surface, whether you want them or not. By the time I reached the low adobe building tucked behind a line of juniper, the sun was beginning to settle behind the hills. A nurse led me down a narrow hallway. She's lucid, the nurse said, but only in short moments. Then she stepped aside, and I walked in alone. Marcella lay propped against a thin pillow. Her hair silvered her frame, too small beneath the blanket. But her eyes, sharp assessing, were the same as the woman in both photographs. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You're his wife," she said, not asking, just stating. Her voice was faint, but precise. "I wondered if you'd ever come." I moved closer. I didn't know about you, I said. Not until recently. She let out a thin, humorless breath. He left, she murmured. Said he'd be back after things settled. He never returned. I stopped waiting when Enrique turned 6. The name landed with a weight I wasn't prepared for. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. I never told my boy who his father was. Thought it would spare him the disappointment. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. The room felt still, as if holding parts of both our histories suspended in the air. She reached toward the small table beside her bed. Fingers trembling. A narrow envelope lay there sealed. She lifted it with both hands and held it out to me. For him, she whispered. He deserves to know what I could never tell him. I took the envelope gently, feeling its thin weight against my palm. She closed her eyes again, and her breathing settled into something softer, slower. I stayed until a nurse came in, then stepped back into the hallway, the envelope pressed against my chest as I walked toward the fading light outside. When I handed Enrique the envelope, I didn't say where it came from. He didn't ask. He turned it over once, then again, and nodded before slipping it into his jacket pocket. We sat beneath the cottonwood tree, the air still, the sun low. He read the letter slowly. No gasps, no words. Just a long, silent reckoning. His shoulders lifted once sharply, then lowered like something had been released. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into the envelope. He didn't look at me, but I saw his hands tremble as he stood. That night, I saw his flashlight moving along the fence line, bobbing between the posts. He walked the full length of the property, east to west, west to east. I didn't interrupt. Some things you have to walk through alone. In the morning, he knocked on the screen door just after sunrise. I was already up making coffee I hadn't planned to drink. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around the mug I placed in front of him, though he didn't take a sip. "I've thought about it," he said. "I don't want to fight you for something neither of us asked for." I waited. "I'll keep the east field," he said quietly. "You keep the west. We'll register them separately. I'll hire my own help, run my side the way I see fit. You do the same." It wasn't a warm proposal. It wasn't an olive branch. But it was clear. It was fair. And it was something that resembled peace. I nodded. "That's acceptable." He stood, looked out toward the barn. "He should have told us," he said almost to himself. "He should have," I replied. He left after that, walking back to his truck. I stayed at the table listening to the old ceiling fan click in rhythm with my thoughts. Later that afternoon, I brought out the old ledger books. I marked off the irrigation zones and ordered new signs for the property boundaries. We wouldn't share a name on the gate, but we'd share the land split down the middle. The days fell into a new rhythm, slower at first, but steady. 2 sides of a ranch, 2 sets of hands, 2 names on 2 separate deeds. The land didn't complain. It simply carried the weight of both of us. A few of the workers, mostly younger ones, chose to move over to Enrique's side. I didn't blame them. He was respectful, curious, and he listened. But the ones who stayed had been here longer. They'd seen me carry feed bags when Roberto was sick, fix wiring in the middle of winter, run irrigation by lantern light. They didn't need a name to know who built this with her own hands. I started by clearing the old storage shed, the one Roberto had locked when he said the breeding program was too much work for too little return. I didn't argue then. I do now. I called the vet, ordered the registry paperwork, found the files I'd kept all those years ago, bloodlines, charts, handwritten notes. It felt like touching the edge of a past I'd set aside for someone else's comfort. I renamed my half of the ranch. Quietly. No announcement. Just a new sign painted in soft letters and hung on the west gate, Maribel Acres. Nothing grand. Just mine. Some mornings I saw Enrique from a distance walking his perimeter or hauling equipment across the creek. We didn't wave. We didn't need to. Our peace came with space. One evening, I walked to the south pasture. The wind was light, and the sun had just dipped behind the far ridge. Dust rose around my boots with every step. I remembered when this land felt too big for me. Now it fit just right. The fields were uneven, the fencing needed work, and the birthing barn would need repairs before winter. But it was mine again, reclaimed not from him, not from Enrique, but from silence. From the years I let myself take the smaller role. I stood there until the stars started to come out, breathing in the dirt, the quiet, and the truth. Tomorrow, I would start the fencing myself. The call came just as I was pouring feed into the bins. The lawyer's voice was measured polite, but I could hear something behind it, like he wasn't sure how I'd take what he had to say. "There was one more item among your husband's documents," he said. "A personal note. It wasn't included with the will. He must have meant to leave it behind, but never sent it." I told him to email a scan. He did. A single sheet of lined paper. Roberto's handwriting unmistakable. Slanted a little cramped near the edges, like he was running out of time and trying not to. "Maribel, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't tell you about Enrique because I was ashamed. I failed him. I failed you. I kept too many doors closed for too long. But I knew if anyone could make peace from this, it was you. Not because I deserved it, because you always gave more than you got. I'm sorry I didn't tell the truth when it mattered. I hope you find your way through it now. R." I read it once, then again slower. No tears came. Only a stillness that felt more like understanding than forgiveness. I didn't call Enrique. I didn't mention the letter. Some things don't need to be shared out loud to do their work. I folded the page neatly and slid it into the small box where I keep my father's wedding band and a photograph of my mother feeding chickens. Then I put on my gloves and headed for the barn. The horses shifted in their stalls, ears flicking toward me. I moved from one to the next, refilling water, checking hooves, brushing mud from coats that had gathered the last of the late-season rain. The light was already fading when I locked the gate behind me. Tomorrow, Enrique's students were coming. He'd asked if they could learn about ranch life, and I'd said yes. No hesitation. I would show them how to mend a fence, hold a halter, walk the land with care. He left me land, yes, but what he really left was something quieter room, and I planned to fill it right.